Um, just before I begin this and give an introduction to this a topic, I just want to share something that happened while we were organizing the webinar on focusing on sexual and reproductive health of women. I don't want to embarrass anybody, because I'm not taking anybody's name or and even if he's there in the room, it's, don't take it personally. It's just, it's a larger problem. So that's why I'm saying it. Because there was a gentleman, a student, I guess a male student, who had registered for the program. But when he realized that it was on sexual and reproductive health of women, he said, "This is only for women. I didn't realize this is only for women. So please cancel my registration." And I think this is the biggest problem that we are facing when it comes to, well, probably maybe one of the bigger, there are so many challenges, but this is one of the bigger problems, is that men don't see this as being a gender issue. They see it as being a woman's issue, a woman's problem. Her health is, and her sexual health is her issue. So, and just to give an example of how it's not, if you look at women in dropping out from school, it's a lot of it has to do with the onset of periods. And because sanitary napkins and menstrual hygiene is not easily available, girls drop out, they get married early, then there is a population increase in which everyone is concerned about population. So this is a gender issue, it's not a women's issue. And I'm actually quite happy, looking at the participants, that there are several men who have joined us today. So thank you to all the men. And just with these few words, I'll just hand over to Damayanti from the FES to say a few, to give her opening remarks.
Thank you, Gayatri. And once again, apologies for the glitch in starting this program. As I said, we've had many programs with WPC this year also, but this has never happened. Always has to be a first time, I guess. But apologies to all the participants, resource persons. Very briefly, FES and Women Power Connect have been holding gender logs for the last, I think, 4 to 5 years. And the idea behind these gender logs is to challenge gender norms, and especially in the context of, in the recent context, it would definitely be in terms of the COVID pandemic. And that's why we thought it's very important to touch this topic on gender perspective on coping with a focus on sexual reproductive health and rights of women during COVID. I do not really want to take more time because we have a really eminent panel today. We have Dr. Arun Datti from who is a public health professional from WaterAid. We have Ms. Lakshmi Murthy from Jatan Sanstha, and we have Advocate Sneha Mukherjee from Human Rights Law Network. And we really look forward to hearing all of you on this really important and significant topic in these trying times. I also am, I welcome all the participants to this discussion and look forward to the deliberations and hopefully more interactions. Thank you, and back to Gayatri.
Thank you, Damayanti. So just before introducing the first resource person, Aisha and has from WPC, we've done a very small survey on what were the challenges faced by women in accessing sexual and reproductive health services. So if I could just request Aisha to please share the findings of that survey before we begin and the questions we asked.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So before I start with the survey analysis, I'll just give a short overview. I'm sure we all are aware of the economic challenges that people went through because of COVID, but not everyone is aware of how the sexual reproductive health rights of women and girls were compromised during the pandemic, as all the healthcare facilities and the resources were diverted towards managing COVID-19. If everyone can recall, there were a lot of reports and articles on how girls and women had problems in managing their menstrual hygiene management due to increased levels of stress and anxiety. Their menstrual health was getting affected during this period. And also during the initial days of the lockdown, there were a lot of reports of how there was a shortage of sanitary pads. So during that time, according to a survey, nearly 84% of women in India reported having restricted or no access to menstrual products. So eventually, they had to resort to adopting unsanitary methods, which is very harmful for their health. So, keeping all these things in mind, we decided it's really important to initiate this conversation and have a discussion. So as a part of this webinar, we did this short online survey, but also a disclaimer. The survey was primarily circulated to those living in urban areas who are students and working professionals. So it's not exactly representative of the problem. Coming to the first question, do you think increase in stress and anxiety due to COVID-19 has had an impact on your menstrual cycle? This, according to a previous survey, around 65% of women stated that it did lead to changes in the menstrual cycle. And as you can see on the screen, as per our survey, we found that almost 35% of women had the same, felt the same, that there was an increase in stress and anxiety, which had some kind of impact on the menstrual cycle, leading to irregular gaps between two cycles. Coming to the next question, only 15% of respondents felt that they had some problem in getting access to contraceptive. This is also due to the fact because online delivery of essential items was still continuing during the initial months of lockdown. So it wasn't exactly a problem, much of a problem in urban areas. Now, this is a significant number. As you can see, almost 60% of women delayed visiting gynecologists for the fear of contracting the virus, as most of the people felt that until unless it's an emergency or absolutely necessary, there's no point in going to a hospital for the fear of getting COVID. Do you think vaccination might lead to period irregularities? Now, this is a very interesting question. If you can recall, when the vaccination drive had started, there was a lot of fake news circulating on how menstruating women are not supposed to get vaccinated. It did raise a lot of questions as people were hesitant to get vaccinated. And to counter this, there were a lot of posts on social media encouraging people to not to believe in these fake news, but go forward and get yourself vaccinated. Given the urban setting, only 77% of people believe that vaccination might have some kind of impact on their period. Lastly, we wanted to know if people had any difficulty in accessing menstrual products. Now, this is a huge number. It's almost 80% of the target group had clearly no issues in getting a menstrual cup or a sanitary pad or a tampon. But going, as mentioned before, and going by the reports and publications, we know that women who belonging to lower socioeconomic groups and living in rural and semi-urban areas were the ones who faced maximum difficulty in managing their menstruation. So it's clearly those belong to weaker socioeconomic status were the ones who bore the brunt of this menstrual product shortage. So that's it from our survey analysis. Lastly, I request everyone to fill out this survey. It's completely anonymous. I'll paste the link in the box and you can please fill it out. Thank you.
Thanks, Aisha. As the disclaimer said, this was a survey conducted with women primarily in urban areas. So even then, 19% unable to access menstrual health products is still, I think, quite a significant percentage. And again, just to very quickly share, as COVID has increased inequalities everywhere, I was just looking at menstrual health products available online, and there's been such a huge increase. You now get black colored sanitary napkins because apparently the youth is doesn't like looking at menstrual blood. And in other parts of India, you have, I think Dr. Arundhati is better equipped to speak to us about this. So let me introduce Dr. Arundhati Muralidharan. She's a public health professional, and she has over 2 decades of working in India. She's currently works with WaterAid, and she's addressing issues of hygiene behavior change. and integration of WASH. I think a lot of people don't know what WASH is, but it's water, sanitation, and hygiene. Integrating WASH into allied themes and sectors of health, nutrition, and education. So, Dr. Arundhati, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gayatri, and thanks to all to having me here today. Sorry, I think there's a bit of a shine or a reflection. So it's really exciting to be here today and to talk about this issue. We do see a bit of a difference from what the conversations that we were having last year and the conversations that we're having this year with regards to the effect of COVID-19 on menstrual health and hygiene. So I'm not going to use a PowerPoint, but I just wanted to share some of the things that we saw last year and what we need to be looking as we move forward as this pandemic morphs into its various waves and hopefully finally dies down. Last year, one of the biggest issues, as the previous speaker pointed out, was that we saw a very immediate kind of curtailed access to products, specifically sanitary pads, in the market and via school-based distribution. In rural areas as well as in urban areas, schools very abruptly closed down, and many girls were dependent on school-based distribution of sanitary pads to manage their menses, and that became a very big need. Also, government programs for distributing or selling pads at subsidized rates, that was also curtailed. There was limited mobility outside the house. There was also very limited mobility of shipments from one state to another. So we saw a lot of curtailed access, which then eased up as lockdowns eased and things kind of resumed to normal. Another big thing that we saw last year, in addition to products, was the inability to access information and support through the routine channels. So we've seen that a lot of organizations, NGOs, CBOs, as well as the government, was doing a lot of awareness generation with girls, with women at the community level. And due to lockdown, that was also curtailed. So girls who were hitting puberty, starting their periods, were not receiving that kind of support and information. That was another big challenge. Third thing that we heard is also because of being suddenly trapped at home, not being in school, places of work, the lack of privacy and the lack of support at home to manage periods became very prominent amongst a lot of the girls and women that we heard stories from. Menstrual problems, as well as, very importantly, help seeking, as you pointed out in the survey. Any kind of help seeking. It could be a gynecologist, but it could also just be reaching out to an NGO that you're familiar with, or an ASHA or an ANM DD. But that help seeking behavior also took a hit. So these were some of the big issues that emerged last year. Just one more actually is that there were a lot of quarantine and isolation facilities that were set up last year, and they were very geared, very oriented towards men. So when women found themselves in these facilities, whether they were migrant women or they were showing symptoms, they did not have access to water, sanitation, pads, a space to bathe, a space to change, space to dry their cloth pads. So that was also quite a bit of a challenge. Now, zoom forward to this year, things had normalized before the second wave. Apart from schools that remained closed in most states. But the government and other organizations were beginning to think of ways to get at least sanitary pads available to girls. We also saw an opportunity to kind of promote more of the cloth-based pads as a good alternative to support hygienic management of menses. I'm sure Lakshmi ji can talk more about that. But it's a big opportunity that many of us saw, that we should be providing information on alternative products, cloth pads, as well as on menstrual cups, as products that you don't have to go out and buy every single month, but that remain with you, and that can really be beneficial if we are ever faced with a lockdown again. We also saw a lot of innovation on how do we remotely reach girls and women with essential information on menstruation, menstrual issues, and connected also with sexual and reproductive problems. So we saw more in the urban space, but come up with a number of apps. So Aina and Orissa came up with a great app. There's apps by Sukhi Bhava called Hello Saheli, and other very grounded organizations that work directly in the field. They also came up with apps that would allow girls and women to have quick access. But this also required that the girls and women had access to digital medium. So they actually had a smartphone which they could use with privacy. Now, when we hit the second lockdown this year, the second wave, we were facing a very new bunch of issues. So we no longer heard stories about curtailed access to sanitary pads. But we were hearing things like women who had experienced COVID, those effects on their menstrual cycle, and they did not know who to go to seek support, seek answers, understand whether this was normal or not normal, how this affected their fertility. This year, we've seen the rollout of the vaccination program. And again, very little information was made available until very recently on the effect of vaccines on women's reproductive health, as well as on their menstrual cycle. So a lot of myths, misconceptions that vaccines, if taken a few days before your period or during your period, can be very detrimental. And we've not been able to unpack that and provide girls and women with adequate guidance on what's happening to your body when you take the vaccine, or what happens to our bodies if we have COVID, depending also on the severity of the disease. Healthcare facilities have seen far more women enter it because of having serious COVID symptoms, but again, were just not sure to the extent to which they were geared up to be able to deal with women's menstrual needs. Similarly, all the COVID care facilities, isolation facilities that were set up in the second wave, were kind of blind to women's menstrual needs. So we saw great pictures of beautifully set up facilities, but just rows and rows of bed with no, kind of partitioning for any woman who may require that additional privacy during her period. So some of these concerns, I think, still remain with us. And I think that it's been a very critical juncture for us to look at menstrual health in a different way. One is to know that we still need to do a better job of communicating essential information about women's bodies, how our bodies work, what menstruation is, how do we manage it in a hygienic and in a safe and in a healthful manner. It's definitely a very clear call for many of us to say that it's not okay to promote a single product. We need to present girls and women with a basket of options. Let them choose from sanitary pads, compostable pads, cloth pads of various varieties that we have now, as well as menstrual cup. Let's make these choices based on what our bodily needs are, our ability to pay, and of course, these kind of emergency situations that we find ourselves in. It's also an important call for us to improve access to sanitation facilities and water in schools, in homes, in other kinds of institutions, schools, healthcare facilities that girls and women may interface with as a result of COVID, and also, of course, beyond COVID. And I think that more than anything, earlier this year, there came out this definition of menstrual health, where we no longer want to just define this so narrowly to hygiene. It is about our health. It's about our menstrual well-being. And I think it's time that we begin to put menstrual health as center, that this is very intimately linked with our physical, emotional, mental well-being. And we need to be addressing this across the lifespan. So it's not just adolescent girls, but it's young women, it's postpartum mothers, it's women well into their reproductive age group, it's premenopausal and menopausal women. And we need to be looking at issues related to vaginal bleeding and our well-being related to this. So one is, yes, the COVID pandemic has shaken things up, but it's also giving us an opportunity to begin to look at menstrual health and its linkages with our sexual and reproductive health in a slightly more meaningful manner, that our programs, our policies that we try to design moving forward take all this into consideration. So I'll stop here, but I'm happy to answer any other, further kind of specific questions or recommendations that we may have, but just wanted to bring this lens into the conversation. Thank you, Gayatri.
Thank you, Arundhati. One thing that I do want to ask, but we'll have the question and answer session later, but just to flag it right now. And if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat box, but we will have a question and answer session later. So we will take questions. Is when you said there's a basket of choice should be made available, I do wonder that even if we are promoting sanitary napkins, are we also thinking about the environmental damage that they cost and disposal of sanitary napkins, and aren't options such as menstrual cups better? But anyway, we can discuss that later. I'd like to now invite Lakshmi ji to make her presentation. And Lakshmi ji has a master's in design from NID, and she also has, Dr. Lakshmi ji, like Dr. Sridharan, she also has a PhD in design from the IDC School of Design and from IIT Bombay. She is the co-founder of Jatan Sanstha, which is an NGO working in Udaipur in Rajasthan. And what is very innovative about Lakshmi ji's work is she has designed a sanitary napkin, which is a cloth napkin called Ugar. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. So you only take the floor and speak. And I know I'll just make you the co-host so you can share the screen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me. So I am, of course, a supporter of cloth pads. So what I'll say is, of course, will be, what I share will be cloth pad heavy. So please, bear with me. Definitely, I support informed choice. I support the basket of products that menstruators can use. But of course, there are environmental issues. So see, making your own cloth pad is what I will focus on. Making your own cloth pad can be very powerful, and it can be a very fulfilling experience. So for many years, we've been teaching menstruators to make their own, cloth pad. You can make it from cloth available at home. You can buy cloth from the market, and you need to depend on nobody. The best part is it can be customized to your needs. 1 layer, 2 layers, 6 layers, it's totally up to you. What length your pad should be, what width it should be, these can be customized according to your body. Over and above all these advantages, it's good for you from the point of view of health, from the point of view of environment. It's biodegradable, and it causes nobody any harm, not you and not your surroundings. During the difficult lockdown period, cloth as a menstrual absorbent emerged as a clear winner. I'm not saying cloth pads here, I'm just saying cloth, plain simple cloth. At a time when all movement was suspended and normal life as we knew it has been redefined. A lot has been spoken about that. So of course the menstruation scenario too took a beating, and cloth pads came, it really came to the rescue. And it was, to my mind, cloth was a savior. So really speaking, the cloth pad that we make at Jatan Sansthan, which is called the Ugair cloth pads. Ugair is a word in Mewari, which means a new beginning. And for me, it's been a long journey, because I started working with cloth pads in 2000, which is 20 years ago. And at that time I was a young designer, and I had I had the privilege of being a recipient of a fellowship from the MacArthur Foundation, which has shaped my work. And I've always worked under the umbrella of reproductive health. So as such, I've housed my work under the reproductive health umbrella, which to me is where it should be. The rightful place of menstrual health and any effort around menstrual health, it lies in all stages of a person's life cycle, pretty much like Arundhati said earlier. And reproductive rights, of course, come in at every point. So, and one of them is the right to absorbents that do not cause any harm. So as previously shared on the other forums, menstrual health somehow got separated from reproductive health. I would put it at, around year 2005. There was a gradual separation, and menstrual health became like one entity, and it became almost delinked from reproductive health. For example, when many groups started looking at menstrual health, they would not include, say, conception and pregnancy, which is such an important part of this whole thing of reproductive health. And then, of course, the other major shift that happened is cloth moved out of the menstrual, product narrative. So the notion of disposable pads, it struck a deep root. And advertisements from multinational companies shamed the use of cloth. So many agencies took up disposable pad manufacturing and distribution with an absolute gusto. As a result of that, today we are in the middle of an environmental crisis with a direct effect, not on the environment, of course, and that, of course, indirectly affects our health. So coming back to the cloth pad effort, really speaking, it did not happen overnight. So one of the activities that I'd initiated earlier in my design studio, this was in 2000. My design studio at that time was called Vikalp Design. That's 20 years ago. And I will share with you now a little journey, because that will help you to help, all of you are listening in, to just locate, where all this started. And the journey that it's taken. So let me make a full screen now. So this was the kind of pad that we were making in the year 2000. And the photograph above that you see, this is a bunch of people who were stitching these pads. At that time, there was no production unit. It was just stitch your own cloth pad. And this activity I was doing with, because I had a design studio, I didn't have an NGO. So I was working with around 8 NGOs, and we were, at that time in 2000, all the adolescent girls I was working with were non-literate, out of school adolescents. And we had these, and no one wore an underwear those years. So the pad had to respond to a design. I mean, the design was something that could be worn without an underwear. Underwear usage kind of increased. And soon we saw many shifts. One was the practice of wearing an underwear. Second, there was this gradual move from cloth from home to a cloth that is available in the market. Now, in North India, in many states in North India, this is available. Of course, widely available in Gujarat and Rajasthan. And it's called a timepiece, which is actually a flannel cloth, and it costs between 10 and 14 rupees. And it comes in a variety of colors, which you can see. And these are dark colors. And so, of course, part of our training and awareness has always been, wear white. That's a totally different sort of conversation. But this was the kind of movement that was happening. So I was greatly troubled by this, because, product 2 and product 3, none of them are sustainable in terms of environment. And then, of course, in terms of, it can give you allergies and whatnot. Of course, the factor of convenience can never be, it has to be accepted that a disposable pad, the convenience that comes with a disposable pad, probably nothing else comes close to that. So Ugair pads was thus kind of developed, and we developed it through a tool which we call the PAS tool, which is Paryavaran, Arthik, Swasth and Samaj. So these are the 4 pillars of sustainability, and based on these 4 factors, the cloth pad went through a fairly long design process. And it was also a part of my PhD journey, where we did 9 studies to support the development and the use of cloth pads. We did trials in Karnataka, we did trials in Rajasthan, and so on. So that's how the cloth pad happened. So it's as I shared previously, it's made with many layers, and you can make it from your own old kurtas, or you can buy cloth and make it from that. So and we've of course always included men in our work from very, very early. From 2000, we've been working with adolescent boys. So the disadvantage we had those years was we didn't have social media, we didn't have different ways to share our work. So a lot of it was kind of happening very locally. So the cloth pads are also stitched by non-menstruators, who are encouraged then to gift the pad to somebody they care about who is a menstruator. And of course, it also works for across board. So I have always believed in copyleft, which came very, very useful during COVID. It was useful even before, but it came extremely useful during COVID, because a lot of groups, took the design and let it grow in their own ways. For example, in Arunachal Pradesh, Bordumsa Mahila Mandal, they started making cloth pads throughout the COVID, and they call them Pyo pads. Pyo means happiness in the Singpo language, in the local tribal language, the Singpo tribe in that area. So, for example, in Dima Hasao, this was just before COVID. They called it Mohar pads, and they would sell it openly in a Hat Bazaar. Mittu Foundation in Karnataka, they call them hybrid pads. So these are all offshoots of Ugair pads. And for example, Center for Microfinance in Pali, Sirohi, there are 2 entrepreneurs who are making, using the same design. So the joy about copyleft is that people just pick it up, and then they modify it, and then it travels and it moves on its own. And that was the joy during COVID, because lots of local efforts happened. So this is a little bit about, this is what Center for Microfinance had shared with us earlier in the Dainik Bhaskar, because those two entrepreneurs that you saw were making the cloth pads, and these were the customers. On the right, you'll see customers buying the cloth pads, and they priced it at 50 rupees. So the cloth pads that I make in Udaipur, they are priced at 120 rupees. But it just depends on the cloth that you buy and where you're sourcing it from. So these are some of the efforts that happened during COVID. And while this is not related at all to COVID, I just thought I would mention that as we were working with so many pressures during COVID, we also realized that I had personally, Jatan, Sansthan, all of us had fallen a little bit behind in including menstruators from different groups. So as a start, we've been collecting stories, and we put this together in Instagram, and it just talks about how you could be a couple who have had no menstrual experience, and then you would have adopted a daughter who has a menstrual experience, and how would you then cope with it, and especially how would you cope during COVID? So these were some of the things that I'll just stop sharing. Just a minute, I'm just trying to find. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so these are little efforts that have been going on, and I guess if we have questions later, I'll be happy to sort of take it forward. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are very, very beautiful pads. They look very nice. But I was just wondering about the cost. It's 50 rupees, you said. But again, we can have a discussion later on. The pads that I see now is selling at on platforms such as Nykaa, and of course they go into many hundreds of rupees, but they're also biodegradable, environmentally sustainable. But how many can afford them? So we didn't want this discussion to be only on menstrual hygiene, but that is an important component of SRHR. And as you said, it had become, menstrual hygiene seemed to have become delinked from other broader aspects. But now I would like to invite Advocate Sneha Mukherjee. She's the director of the Women's Justice Initiative and Human Rights Law Network. And she has dealt with dozens of cases of medical termination of pregnancy and with women's reproductive rights in courts. And although most of the women respondents in our survey said that they did not go to a gynecologist during this period, I actually wonder, because most women in India don't go anyway unless it's really an emergency. I wonder, what about the women who did want to go? Were they able to go? And what has been your experience, Sneha, during this lockdown and during the pandemic?
Thank you so much, Gayatri. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, great. I think the question that you asked is very important, because we have been seeing a lot of cases of medical termination of pregnancy coming to courts across the country, not just in Delhi or Supreme Court, but across the high courts, I think. But what has been interesting is there has been a hike in cases during the period of COVID. And the usual reason that we find is that most of the women who are pregnant, they require certain scans at certain periods during their pregnancy. And because of the lockdowns that have happened across the country in the first wave, or even now, I think during the second wave this year, when we saw that there were, I think, lockdowns in specific states in phases, a lot of women were not being able to access basic healthcare services in hospitals, because most of the hospitals were declared as COVID hospitals. Anything as basic as sonography, an ultrasound was not being, a service of ultrasound was not being provided by any centers, be it smaller, I think, laboratories or hospitals, government hospitals, private hospitals. And as a result, scans that could be done at 17 or 18 weeks, ideally, were done as late as 26, 27 weeks, because then the women had to wait for the entire period of lockdown and could only go to their gynecologists and to the hospitals and get their tests done, say 7, 10, 8, 10 weeks post the actual time. As a result, these women had no choice but to, go and seek permission from the high courts. And this is not just something that we have seen in abortion. I think accessing service because of a certain reason, not wanting to continue your pregnancy for a certain reason is one thing. What we've also seen is in a lot of cases, pregnant women have been refused services. And these are not cases where women are seeking termination. These are not cases where women need to get certain tests done because they are assessing whether they want to continue or not continue their pregnancy. These are simply cases where pregnant women have not been able to access basic tests, sonographies, nutrition, healthcare checkups, nothing at all. In the first wave also, we saw that Anganwadi centers were closed. There were so many women that had come up. Hospitals refused to admit them. Even women who were in labor, we have met women who were forced to give birth at their homes because the hospitals refused to admit them. Even government hospitals. A lot of these women did not financial support to actually go to a private to be able to get to deliver their baby safely, and as a result they had to deliver at home. Some women even lost their babies because of the situations they were in, and these led to a lot of litigation, I think, in the first wave as well as the second wave. What was also interesting is during, I think, the period between the first and the second wave in March, we saw that the government finally came up with the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Act, something that has been in the pipeline for more than 4 years that I know of. The first amendment was introduced in 2017, and it did not work out. And then the next one was introduced in 2020, which was then, I think, enacted in 21. And certain parts that could have been made, enforceable immediately. For example, increasing the limit from 20 weeks to 24 weeks. It has not been done yet. The law was enacted in March, and we are at the end of July, and doctors, medical professionals, women, they still can't use this law, even though there has been an amendment to increase the time limit, because the rules have not been notified. And even then, the way the amendment was brought in, I think it restricts access for women to a very large extent. Although I think the intent of bringing in an amendment and to, I think, liberalizing the law was to create better access. But the way the amendment has been brought in, the way the amendment has been worded, I think it restricts the access to even greater lengths, and which is extremely disheartening, because if anything, like when it comes to abortion or when it comes to reproductive health, what we have learned in the last 1.5 years is that the one thing that I think our system could not do is take a gendered, I think, approach to the health crisis that happened in India, and when it was very important. And we have seen that there has been increase in cases of maternal deaths in certain rural areas because of lack of access to blood. There have been cases, as Gayatri, you mentioned at the beginning, that there have been a hike in the number of cases, children, female, girls dropping off. And there is a lot of litigation that is going on in the courts. What has been good is that the courts have been very quick and very receptive in one-on-one individual cases, but the courts have been very slow to respond to cases that cater to questions dealing with just an issue in general. For example, child marriage or access to blood for women, or for anybody for that matter, in hospitals. Also, just access to basic healthcare services for pregnant women, such as tests or being able to get admitted in the hospital. There have been so many cases where we had to speak to the hospital. We went to Delhi High Court in a couple of cases just so that women were given admission in hospitals, and they were so that they're able to deliver safely in a safe space in a hospital without having any complications. I mean, this is as basic as it gets. And other states, this is in Delhi, where people believe that the healthcare systems are possibly better than maybe most other states. So on the legal front, I think we have seen a very, very, high jump in the cases because of how restricted access has been to services, to doctors. Also, there is, although there has been an increase in telemedication over, I think, the period of COVID, but this is something that is not accessible to women across the country. It is something that might have been, this is something that is maybe convenient to women in bigger cities like Delhi or Bombay or Bangalore, but or bigger townships also, but it is not something that has been accessible in our experience in more, I think, remote parts of the country, in rural areas, because a lot of cases that we have done over the last 2 years have been for women who come from rural areas and who have not been able to access services because first, COVID restricted their movement. So even basic tests were not available to them because maybe the nearest district hospital or the nearest CHC is 30, 40, 50 kilometers away, and they were not allowed to step out of their houses. They faced a lot of discrimination. They faced a lot of, I think, abuse from the admin, just because we saw that in the first lockdown, I think there was police everywhere. And a lot of women had to face a lot of difficulty just getting out of their houses and going to the healthcare centers to get basic services because they were not being allowed unless it was an absolute emergency. Also, I think as far as contraceptive information services are concerned or access is concerned, I think that has also been restricted because a lot of women are restricted in their homes, especially young women who are sexually active, and a lot of times because they're restricted inside their homes, they are not able to access contraceptives that they could otherwise buy over the counter. As a result, this has been our experience with the cases that have come. We have got a lot of young women have gotten in touch with us who wish to terminate their pregnancy because they did not have access to contraception or because of contraceptive failure during this period, and for various reasons, and also because of lack of sensitization around the issue, they were not sure what are their rights, how can they access something like this, how can they go about seeking abortion, or if they are beyond 20 weeks, what is a way out. And for most women, I think they do not want to go to the courts because they are first going through the legal process is a huge task. Even if it is something that takes a week before the courts to get an order or to, I think, to be able to, go ahead and, get the termination through a court order. But the process is something that is extremely physically and emotionally taxing for women who have to go through it. And a lot of young women are not willing to go through that, especially women that we have been able to speak to in the last, say, 5 or 6 months. And as a result, what happens is, even after advising very strongly, we have seen that it has been an unfortunate situation that a lot of women have resorted to meeting doctors who are willing to provide the service even beyond the legal limit at a certain price. And the concern that sort of worries us is like, first of all, it is not legal to do it. Secondly, is it safe for young girls or women to go and access, seek a service like this from somebody who's willing to, I think, do something that is otherwise not legally allowed? And how is it that we can address this? And this is, I think, a very, very big concern when it comes to now that physical, I think, physical movement is restricted to a very large extent. And also, I think, accessibility is restricted to a very large extent. I think I will stop. So if there are any questions, I would be very happy to take them.
Thank you, Sneha. I think what was most uplifting is what you're saying is that the courts are responsive. And I know that you have to go to the courts for a lot of the times women do have to run for. The sanitary napkins were not listed as an essential commodity in the first lockdown. And then a court case had to be filed, and then sanitary napkins were made an essential commodity So yeah, we are very much dependent on our courts and our legal system. I would request all of you who have questions, you can either unmute yourself or you can type your question in the chat box. I have seen that in the chat, people are speaking in praise of cloth, sanitary napkins, and menstrual cups. So clearly there is preference for environmentally sustainable options, but I would like to ask Dr. Arundhati, how feasible is it in India to promote these as opposed to sanitary napkins, and can we do it?
Great question. So I think that there's no straight answer for this. I think what we're seeing is there's a huge market force that we're dealing with, right? There's very large, significant, strong body that's making sanitary pads that are available. So you can't fight against the P&Gs and the J&Js of this world. So these products do exist. And frankly, they are also a preference for many girls and women. So we should not say that is, one pushback that I've received when we talk about the basket of choice as well as the environmental impact of sanitary pads is, why do we continue to burden women and women's bodies with this environmental impact? Look at the other kind of waste that we're generating in our households, and that is a much larger quantum of the waste volume. So again, why are we driving this dialogue just that women are contributing to this? So, so I think that one side is you can't stop these market forces, they're there. What I think that we can do is many girls and women today, whether you're in urban or in rural areas, don't know of the other alternatives that are available to them. So I, for example, have spoken with lots of girls in rural India, and I think Lakshmi ji would have seen this, but immediately, especially, there are some who would have never used a cloth pad, and they don't know that there is an option that exists for them. But when you introduce cloth pads and the different types that we have, even menstrual cups, we're seeing great feedback on menstrual cups from rural areas from women and girls in tribal areas as well as in urban India, that this is a feasible option. But unless we kind of put these options in front of girls and women, tell them what are the advantages and the relative challenges or disadvantages of using any of these products. If we engage them in a discussion about the suitability of these products for their bodies, their context, their ability to pay, their comfort level, we can actually put that choice in their hands. Right now, what's happening is that they're seeing one message, right? Sanitary pads are it. And after this approach, they may still think sanitary pads are it. So that's fine. But you will also begin to see some of them who are like, I can also use this because there is a great comfort to using, say, a cloth pad. Now, I myself, for most of my my menstrual life, I was a sanitary pad user. That was what was introduced to me, and that's what I used for so many years. I made the switch to cloth pads, and I'm a very big supporter of cloth pads after I had my son, because I was just so uncomfortable wearing pads. And later on, I got into this whole environmental concern, but for me, the immediate thing was comfort. And I realized that it's not challenging for me. But I also, I don't live with extended family members. I have a bathroom where both my husband and son are very comfortable seeing my pad soaking in a bucket of water. They both know about it. My son is young, but he knows what these products are. He sees them lying around at the house. He's fine with it. But I realized that I have all these supportive structures in place. I have a bathroom. I have people in my home who don't think twice when they see this bucket with my pad soaking in it. So I have all this, which I realized that when I speak to girls and women in the field, they're like, we don't have what you have in your house that allows you to do this, and which is fair. But which is why, again, we need to be having discussions on these products, helping each other overcome the challenges of washing a cloth pad or saying that, we don't have enough water, so cloth pads are a bad option. We can wash cloth pads with less water. There's a way to do it. And I'm sure Lakshmi ji can shed far more light. But it's something that I have learned myself after being a cloth pad user for a number of years now, that there is a easier, simpler, less water intensive way to do it. But we need to start having these discussions and allowing ourselves to make a choice of a product that really suits us. The other thing that I think that is important, and here's where media plays a very big role, is that there's been a very skewed narrative. If you look, and I've looked at studies that have been done on menstrual health and hygiene, okay, and on product use, all of them, if you look at them, say that a certain proportion of girls or women also use cloth. But the conclusion that we draw from these surveys and studies is there are X% who are using the hygienic sanitary pad, and there are X% who are using this unhygienic cloth pad, not bothering to understand if the use of cloth is unhygienic, which it may not be. We may be using this cloth in a hygienic manner, but simply we're categorizing the use of cloth as unhygienic. And then we're picking up these findings, and you'll see the media splashed across that the AC Nielsen study found that only so much are using sanitary pads and so much are using unhygienic materials such as cloth. Now we have NFHS data, which also says that. And again, it's being projected as it's this versus that. We need to begin to change this narrative that there is a pattern of mixed use in the country. There is already cloth pad use as well as sanitary pad use. And frankly, many sanitary pad users in rural India who are dependent on government supply, school supply, are also using cloth pads. Our focus should not be on getting them to choose between the two, but to say that how can we support hygienic use, and how this mixed use of both cloth and pad can actually help us change our menstrual materials more frequently in the day. And it helps us be more healthy, more hygienic during our period. So I really very strongly believe that we need to switch this narrative of cloth bad, pads good, and that, we need, yes, and I think also on stressing on what we need to do, which is hygienic use, and not this overarching product focus. So yes, sorry for a very long-winded, but the 2 points that I needed to make. On the environmental part of it, Gayatri and colleagues, I think that yes, sanitary pads do have a huge environmental burden. They remain in the environment for years and years and years. But I mean, I think that that's one angle that we can take, and that angle might appeal to many of us. It appeals to women in urban India as well as in rural India. We think that they don't care about the environment, but they do. But I think it's about how we are framing this. It should not be the only concern, because many of us also think of the environment as away from us, like it's not affecting us immediately. So that environmental angle may not always work. You need to couch it as, how is it beneficial to me personally, and to my life, which will then also include the environment. I think also that we need to support innovation. We've got great innovations on compostable pads that are being tried, but we also need to figure out how we can get the large market players to invest in R&D to make more environmentally friendly products. They certainly have the resources to do that, but then we need to actively lobby for them that a part of their product basket should be, say, a compostable pad and not just our regular pads. But let's make that ask. That ask cannot be get out of the market. The ask is, what can they do? How can they support product innovation? Yeah, so that's what I wanted to share, guys. So thanks.
Does anyone have any question to ask the resource persons? I'm definitely curious to know how you can wash a cloth pad with less water, which Lakshmi ji can inform us about. But if it is, yeah.
Oh, well, if you, Arundhati summed up everything so well that, I'm finding it difficult to add to that. How do you wash a cloth pad with less water? Now, if you have facilities like a good wash basin with running water in your tap, just one quick rinse like that, and then into a bucket it goes. That first quick rinse takes out 90% of all what has been discharged. and then you put it into a bucket, and then you can collect up to 12, 15 pads. And if you have a washing machine, you just put it into the washing machine and you're sorted out. Now, what happens when you don't have all these facilities? And then putting it into a bucket is definitely an issue, because you have this one tiny latrine, or you have this one tiny bathing space. Will you go and stand inside that bathing space, or will you put the bucket? So there is definitely a problem. So that's half the reason why a menstruator will wear a pad for a very long time. You will kind of want to have as many less things to wash at the end of the day. But the beauty about the cloth pad is, especially if you're using the say the Ugair model, which has a napkin. So what happens is that now if this is your napkin, wait a second, let me just do this properly for you. So the cloth pad users will know that they'll probably use this one surface, and then when this gets soiled, they'll turn it around and then use the other one, and then they'll find places where they can places that are empty, which they can place against their body. So sometimes I wonder when people say that, they wear one cloth pad the whole day. I think no, they're changing the surface that's next to them. So that's the advantage of a cloth pad. But washing, it will take about 10 minutes, not more than 10 minutes, maximum 10 minutes to wash a cloth pad. And if you talk to rural menstruators, they don't see it much as a problem, because anyway, they're washing their own clothes and this just gets washed. The problem is washing in the mornings, washing in the day. So if you are in a rural location, you'll have a nala running in front of your house. So you will not want to wash your your cloth pad or your menstrual cloth in the day. You will choose an evening time to wash your cloth pad. So there are these advantages and disadvantages that go with it. So the other thing is that it also depends on the detergent that you're using. So more caustic, a detergent that has more caustic will fray your cloth that much faster. And for example, the same Ugair pad, if I were to use Ujala Sabun or whatever that is available in the areas where we work, and if I would say use Ariel, and users have told us that the Ariel, the users who used Ariel detergent for their pads, it lasts for more than 2 years. Whereas if you're using Ujala with a greater greater sort of percentage of caustic, it'll fade that much faster or tear that much faster. So, and then of course, hanging out in the sun, there's so many superstitions. It's still amazingly there, and sometimes I feel इतने सालों से काम कर रहे, फिर भी superstitions तो बस वहीं का वहीं है. सांप काट जाएगा, मेरा पति का पति मर जाएगा, पति बीमार हो जाएगा, पति का लाइफ कम हो जाएगा. Those kind of things are absolutely still there. It's still alive. The superstitions are still alive, because no one wants to take a risk. That's what they tell you. They'll tell you that risk क्यों लेना है? हमने सुना है कि ऐसा हो जाएगा, कि सांप काट जाएगा, तो फिर क्यों रिस्क लेना है? So they were really worried about those kind of things. Yeah, someone has said, yeah, okay. Arundhati has said she soaks it for 15 minutes. Absolutely, it loosens up, and as you keep using your pad, it's easier to wash. Of course, there'll be a brown stain on it if you're using white, because at Ugair we always promote white, because we believe that you should see what you're discharging, so you can you can take charge if your discharge is, say, light pink or green or yellow. So you should know what you're discharging. That's the reason why commercial sanitary disposable napkins are bleached white. The wood pulp as such, which is the core of a sanitary napkin, is not white. It's bleached to make it white. So there are all these issues. And of course, see, if you go to, say, Rail Magra, wherever we are working, you will find Maggi noodles, versions and versions of Maggi noodles, versions of Kurkure, versions of all kinds of things that come in plastic. So in that sense, I definitely agree with Arundhati that these plastics are causing greater harm than the plastics available that come with a sanitary napkin, disposable sanitary napkin. So sometimes I think, yes, I have to agree that why are we putting the bhar and the jor on women? So yeah. So someone is asking how long how long is a cloth sustainable? So from what we have understood, it can, the Ugair pads are made of two parts, the holder and the napkin. So the napkin will fray by 1 year, but the holder will last you more than 2 years. It depends on how nicely you look after it. And supposing you are a user with only 3 pads, then obviously it will tear quickly. If you own 6 pads, it will last you that much. So that's how it works. Yeah. So
thank you. There's one more question which has come on the issue of obstetric violence in India. I'm not very sure what it means, but if I understand correctly, I think it probably has to do with insensitivity of doctors and gynecologists when treating women and reducing them to their reproductive component. I'm not, would Sneha, would you like to try to address this question? I think I don't know, in your work, have you come across doctors who are judgmental against women becoming pregnant, or they have this moralistic outlook? I think that this is what the question is, but if the person who asked would like to clarify, please do. Otherwise, this is what I'm assuming the question is.
Yes, of course, I have personally, and the organization, of course, has taken up a lot of cases relating to obstetric violence. And of course, yes, we do come across medical professionals who treat women, especially in government setups. I think this has been the case, our experience at least, that there are a lot of cases, especially I think the most number of cases we have seen are in Odisha, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, some in Delhi actually. Some have even resulted in death of the women in Chhattisgarh as well. So yes, of course, we come across a lot of these cases, especially in rural areas, or women are not just discriminated against because they are women, but also on the basis of their caste, on the basis of their economic backgrounds, and that causes there have been cases of physical violence also, not physical as well as sexual violence that we have seen, especially physical violence and discrimination that we have seen, and we have taken these cases to the court. So far, the cases we have done have taken cognizance of the violence that has happened, even provide for direct, not just provide for compensation, but also direct investment matters of obstetric violence. But I think the question is not just maybe limited to this. Gayatri, am I audible?
No, I think you, the last sentence that you were saying, you went off.
Oh, so yeah. So I said that in most of the cases that we have been able to take to the court, various high courts, some has even gone to the Supreme Court. A lot of them have gone to NCDRC. We have filed dozens of complaints before the Medical Council to bring to their notice cases of obstetric violence. So the courts have taken a very strong view in cases of obstetric violence. They have initiated inquiries against the hospital and the doctors who have done it. They have provided compensation in a lot of cases. So our experience with the judiciary has been okay. I wouldn't say great, but has been okay. Also, a lot depends on not just the medical professionals, but also the judges the cases go before. So it's subjective, but yes, it is true that we do, I think, come across a very, very high number of cases, especially in states that have a larger chunk of rural population, because we see that it is this obstetric violence is not something that we have seen that is a lot more common in states that have a larger rural population than states that have a comparatively lower rural population. So that is something that has happened. The courts have taken, in some cases, like I said, the courts have taken a very, very strong view. But also there have been cases where the courts have simply refused to take a view and, shifted the case from one forum to the other. But I believe the question is not just restricted to this. If the person who has asked the question can clarify, because I understand the question to a certain extent, I believe, because the question says that sometimes inclusionary terms are used where the term women is, I think, people prefer to replace the term women and use the term people who can give birth, or people with an uterus. This is, I think, terms that have been used by people who work with the LGBTQI community. This is also something, I think, that this is what I've heard, that instead of using the word women, we could use something that is a little more inclusionary. But in doing so, sometimes these phrases, women, people, persons with uterus, or persons who can give birth, are used. So I believe one could simply say person. So when even in courts we say that we should use, instead of saying pregnant woman, you should say pregnant person, because then it becomes a lot more gender inclusive than just saying pregnant women. So maybe that. But if the person who's asking the question can simply clarify what they are asking, then it would be easier to maybe respond to this.
Ma'am, what I mean to say by this question is, sometimes when we use inclusionary language, like people who can give birth or people within uterus, so essentially we are reducing the people who can do so to their reproductive organs, or their ability to give birth. And this has been a topic of debate in a lot of societies, mostly Western societies, that a lot of cisgender females have a problem with the fact that they do not want to be reduced to their reproductive component. So how do we address this issue? And essentially in terms of India, where we do not have such a large number of transgender people, and obstetric violence is, like you said, happens on different bases, like for example caste and class and other privileges.
So first, I think India has a fairly large number of persons belonging to the queer community. It is just that a lot of people choose not to speak about it openly, and it is a choice that I think they have. But also, I think this discussion and debate around using certain terminologies has developed from, I think, the belief that everybody, like all genders, should be included, or these terms in I think in reference to reproductive health have to be a lot more gender inclusive than just women. So I think when in personally, if you want to address, maybe just use the term pregnant person or pregnant, like this is what I do, because I do a lot of cases around reproductive health, around pregnancy. So use the term pregnant person instead of saying person.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, but apart from that, I think this is something that might remain a contention for debate because of, I think, how different communities respond to this issue. So there might not be, at this point, I might not be able to give this one definitive correct answer, because this is something that might vary. But then again, like in personal use, one could just use the term person instead of, women or any other, like making it gender specific.
Understandable. Thank you, ma'am.
We still have just a few minutes for one more question, if anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask. Or you could put it on the chat box, whatever you prefer.
अच्छा
Okay, then if there are no further questions, I think then we can end today's discussion. Although there's a lot of food for thought that I think that has come from today's webinar. Is there any feedback form? No, we haven't. Have we prepared one, Aisha? I don't think we have, but you can give us your feedback by mailing us. I would request you to please fill up the survey if you can. Maybe Aisha, if you could send the link again on chat.
Yeah, I'll just do that.
Oh, I just saw this chat comment, need more advocacy for menstrual cups. Yeah, I agree totally. Maybe before leaving, if you could please fill up the questionnaire, it would just help us get a better idea of what's the situation, at least in urban India, with regard to access to contraceptives, menstrual health care products, visiting of gynecologists, and generally women taking care of their health. Maybe if there are no more questions, would Jyoti or Damayanti, would you like to say anything or add anything to the discussion?
I think for some reason, probably Damayanti got disconnected. I think it's been a very fascinating discussion, great inputs, and a lot of food for thought, as Gayatri already mentioned. And I feel if we've been able to kind of, we've definitely gained insights into this very, it's an issue that concerns everyone, not just one gender. And if one can bring about changes in your habits or maybe just have more sensitization on this issue, if we've been able to achieve even a fraction of that's, I think, a success in itself. And these conversations, I think, really need to happen, and really thankful to all the resource persons, to WPC team for organizing such a great round of discussion. So thank you. And back to you, Gayatri.
Thank you again to FES and to the resource persons. Just before closing, just a few things that were coming to my mind when Lakshmiji was talking about how a sanitary pad has to be white so that you can see your discharge. Interestingly, I don't know if you know, but the latest fashion now seems to be for black, because everybody seems to be, at least in urban areas, too sensitive to see what they are discharging. So I don't know what is it that companies are trying to promote, but while I agree with Dr. Arundhati that there is no that sanitary napkins are very comfortable, and to ask women to stop using sanitary napkins because of the environmental harm does not seem fair, given the environmental costs of other products. I do think that I'm more inclined towards using cloth pads or menstrual cups, and I think from the chats that we are getting that more people seem to also think that is a better option. So with this, you can send us your feedback at our email address. Maybe I'll just type out our email address, and you could let us know if you have any suggestions for how we could improve further webinars and discussions. And with this, I'll thank Jyoti, Damayanti, Dr. Arundhati, Lakshmiji, and Sneha. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Thank you.